What's up, guys? Today, of course, I'm going to be giving you a sidearm guide for Battlefield 1. It's by far my most requested video over the last month, so here it is. I'm going to give it to you today. Of course, sidearms are very subjective though. Some people like every little bit of a statistical competitive advantage on Synthic. Other people pick it because it has a funny name. So, this review, what I'm going to give to you today is this. I'm going to present you the logic statistically that I think are some of the better weapons in the game for sidearms, and you go from there. You can pick it if it has a funny name. You can pick it if it gives you the absolute best competitive advantage statistically. The answer, of course, is it depends on your preference and your play style in terms of which sidearm you're going to want to choose. For clarity, I'll list them by damage model archetype. So what this means usually is that damage model in most FPS games tends to be balanced out by fire rate and magazine size. So more than likely you can assume an inverse or opposite relationship, and it goes like this. A high damage model weapon will more than likely have a slower fire rate and smaller magazine size, and a low damage weapon will more than likely have a high fire rate and probably a larger magazine. Of note, be aware that some of these weapons are class exclusives, so I'm going to list them all by archetype, but of course they're not going to be available for all classes. But I'll clarify that before we get into the stats. And here we go. In terms of all class sidearms, meaning all four classes can use these weapons, it goes as follows. The M1911 and the Hellfighter variant, the P08 pistol, the MLE 1903, the C93. The C93 you have to reach support class rank 10 to unlock, but once you unlock it, it's available for all classes, and the number 3 revolver. Additionally, all three classes have three specific sidearms set for that class. For assault, it's the Gasser M1870, the Howdah pistol, and the 1903 hammerless. For medic, the specific three are the auto revolver, the C96, and the Taschen pistol M1914. For support, it's the Rapidier pistol M1912, the Bulldog revolver, and the Modelo 1915. And lastly, for scout, it's the Mars automatic, the Modelo 1889, and the Frommer stop. So let's get into the archetypes and the stats. First, we'll break down the higher damage, lower fire rate models. These weapons tend to have 53 damage, give or take a few points, as their max damage within about 5 meters. Some go a little bit longer than this. And damage drops somewhere between 13.5 to, as the low, to 21 by about 38 meters. All of them have a max magazine size of 6, with the Howdah being the only exception with a smaller magazine size of 4. Their fire rates are relatively slow compared to other weapon archetypes, as their range of fire rates varies from 163 on the low side, that's the number 3 revolver, to 224, which is the auto revolver, in rounds per minute. Additionally, these weapons have a longer than average reload speed compared to other sidearms, as the fastest in this archetype is the number 3 revolver, and it takes 2.3 seconds to reload. They also tend to have higher than average recoil compared to most other weapons. Vertical recoil tends to average about 5 degrees of recoil, some slightly less, some slightly more, and 1 degree of horizontal recoil, so this is something to account for as well. Archetype here for high damage model basically is a high risk, high reward type. If you're an accurate person that can regularly put out accurate shots, this is going to reward the hell out of you. But if you're the type that, say you get hit by suppression, or you're just not a super accurate person at the game yet, you're going to be punished miserably, because one miss sometimes determines whether you're going to lose or win the firefight. The archetype here consists of the auto revolver, the Modelo 1889, the Bulldog, the Gasser 1870, the Howdah pistol, and the number 3 revolver. My recommendations for this archetype are as follows. The Gasser 1870 for assault has the highest damage model of at least 52 damage up to 20 meters and 21 damage from 38 meters on, which makes it extraordinarily punishing inside of 20 meters, needing only 2 shots to kill if you're hitting upper body and up. It has a good magazine size of 6, but it has an average muzzle velocity among sidearms, and it's got an extremely slow fire rate of only 179 rounds per minute among sidearms. It's not a bad fire rate, it's just extremely slow among other sidearms. Additionally, it has the highest recoil among sidearms as well. If you're skillful, you can quick work of people with this weapon, especially wounded players. You can one-shot them a lot of the time. The auto revolver and the Modelo 1889 have a much more forgiving fire rate of 224 rounds per minute, but they have less damage after the drop-off ending point at 15 and 17.5 damage apiece at 38 meters. Lastly, if you're staying within 5 to 10 meters, the Bulldog for the support class has a great fire rate among this archetype, good damage model in close range, and lower than average recoil for the class, but you make up for it in the trade-off in that it has probably the worst reload speed I've ever used in many FPS games in history. So that's the trade-off you're going to have to deal with. Next, we'll get into the medium damage, medium fire rate archetype. These weapons tend to have a max damage of 30 to 40 within 8 meters. Some go a bit longer, like the Mars Automatic at 14 meters, and drops to a minimum damage of 15 by about 30 meters. All of them have a magazine size of about 8, give or take, a round. Their fire rates expectedly are middle ground compared to other sidearms. Fire rates tend to average about 300 to 350 rounds per minute. The reload speed for most of these weapons takes just above or just below 2 seconds, so far you're seeing not a lot of weakness associated with this archetype. Recoil isn't significant because it tends to average about 1.5 to 2 degrees of vertical recoil and about 0.3 to 0.5 degrees of horizontal recoil. But it is notable, especially because if you're firing quickly, that recoil will add up quickly. It is the safest archetype, I guess is a way of phrasing it, as larger magazine size, middle ground fire rate, and good but not incredibly bad damage model means that it doesn't really penalize the individual for missing as much as the higher damage archetypes would, but you're probably going to need at least 1 or 2 more shots to get your kill compared to the higher damage archetype. So that is the trade-off with it. The weapons for this archetype are as follows: the M1911, the Mars Automatic, the MLE 1903, the P08 pistol, and the Repeatia pistol M1912. In terms of recommendations, for this weapons archetype, the M1911 is an extremely solid weapon across the board. A 35 max damage up to 8 meters away, a 15 damage beyond about 32 meters make it capable of killing a wounded player at range, although I'd never actually advise you to use a sidearm at very long ranges. It has an 8-round magazine, and it takes less than 2 seconds to reload from empty. So it's really strong across the board, and the great news is you get it early. I think it's the default sidearm, if I'm not mistaken, because I haven't unlocked them in a while. The Mars Automatic for Scout is another solid choice across the board with a 40 max damage and minimum 23 damage model, an 11-round magazine, and a very high 530 meters per second muzzle velocity. Recoil is quite manageable, although it does have a relatively low fire rate of 200 rounds per minute for the archetype. Also, another weapon I like in this archetype is the MLE 1903. It has a high fire rate, good damage model, and an 8-round magazine size, and it's especially great because of the quick draw speed if you're playing aggressive scout and you need that one follow-up shot. So consider that one as well. Lastly, the low damage, high fire rate archetype. These weapons tend to have a max damage of about 26.5 within about 10 meters. Some go a little bit longer, like the support level 10 sidearm, the C93, that goes to 15 meters, and drops to a minimum damage of about 13.5 at about 32 meters. All of them have a magazine size of about 8 to 9 in range. Their fire rates expectedly are much higher than compared to the other archetypes. Fire rates tend to average about 350 to 450 rounds per minute. The reload speed for most of the weapons in this archetypes is about the same as the middle ground archetype, at about 2 seconds, give or take maybe a couple of split seconds, and they're especially quick though with a round left in the chamber. Recoil is by far the lowest among these weapons, averaging 1 degree of vertical recoil and 0.5 degrees of horizontal recoil both left and right. So as you'd expect, they'd also have the largest magazine size. They have the largest magazines, fastest fire rates, and some of the better muzzle velocities, which I found a little bit surprising among the sidearms, but a low damage model overall, so especially outside of 10 meters, you're going to have to land lots of shots to kill, but the good news is you're going to have lots of shots to do it. and a little recoil to work with. The weapons for this archetype are the 1903 hammerless, the Modelo M1915, the C93, the Frommer Stop, the C96, and the Taschen Pistol M1914. Recommendations? For this weapon archetype, I like the 1903 hammerless. It's an assault exclusive weapon, but it's extremely solid across the board. The 26.5 max damage up to 8 meters away and the 13.5 minimum damage beyond 32 make it capable of killing a wounded player at range. It has a 9-round magazine size and it takes less than 2 seconds to reload from empty. The Modelo M1915 for support is a virtual clone of it, so it's very effective for a support sidearm as well. And the Mauser C96 has a different damage model of 28 max and 15 minimum, but of course the trade-off being that it has a slightly slower fire rate of 300 rounds per minute and a magazine size of 10. So as you can see, for the trend for just about all sidearms is when one's got a strength in one category, it's sort of weak in one to make up that balance difference. So in the case of the C96, you have higher overall damage model, but a slower fire rate to make it work. Inverse relationship like I talked about. Personally, I've always preferred higher damage, lower fire rate archetypes, especially in Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. But Battlefield 1 has done a pretty damn good job of balancing out the different archetypes overall. So the medium damage archetype, the one that includes the M1911, has very solid choices among them. A lot of those you can't really screw it up. They're quite solid. You can find great success among the low damage archetypes. However, of course, you're going to have to land a lot more shots. And if you miss a few early on the draw, despite having a larger magazine size and faster fire rate, the higher damage models will probably knock you out quick. So don't dismiss the low damage ones, though. Give them a try because, especially in that case, like the 1903 hammerless, I found that to be quite effective overall. So to sum up, if I had to choose sidearms in general, the starting sidearm, the M1911 of the medium archetype, is probably one of your strongest overall choices in the game, and the great news is you get it early. As well as the C93 when you finally grind all the way through to the support class rank 10 unlock. It's pretty solid across the board, even though I believe that one is in the lower damage category. The Mars Automatic, I think, is probably by far the best scout weapon to use. The MLE M1903 is another solid one across the board for just about all classes. And the PDA pistol for scout is kind of overlooked a little bit, but it's not too bad. And of course, like I said, the the 1903 hammerless for assault is solid. When it comes for support, I like the Bulldog despite the horrid overall reload speed, surprisingly. I know a lot of people don't like it, but it's pretty solid across the board for its archetype. It really sucks reloading. Other than that, those are probably my overall favorite choices, but I sort of do cop out a little bit besides the Mars Automatic for Scout. The M1911 is, if I'm struggling with a sidearm for whatever reason, if I flip back to the M1911, I usually do solid again. So that is one you can definitively choose across probably all classes, and you'd still maintain success. Lastly, you probably didn't notice I mentioned the Colibri, and of course that's for a reason. I imagine if you're watching this video, it's different levels of competitiveness in the players watching the videos. Some of you might be like, oh, maybe I'll look into a sidearm that's a little bit better than what I'm using. Other ones might be looking at, I want that absolute definitive advantage. And the Colibri offers absolutely none of that. You should not be using it unless you want to brag and post videos of you saying, look at me, I got the kill. I got to kill the guy with the Colibri, because that's all it's good for. Don't use it. Use it for fun. But if you're using it for a competitive advantage, I don't know what to say. Above all, experiment with them and find one that matches your style. A more passive style might actually be benefited by the higher damage archetypes, because that way you can stay at range and still deal really good damage. And if you're playing a more aggressive style, it might actually be better suited to go for the lower damage archetype, because you can get right in someone's face and just continually pump out rounds and cause them to flinch. I can only present you the stats and the options. I think I broke down the archetypes pretty decently. The rest is up to you. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. Share it around if you feel this would help someone, and of course, subscribe if you'd like to see more and suggest recommendations in the comments. Have a good one, YouTube.